We are the hollow men. We are the stuffed men. Leaning together, headpiece filled with straw, alas, our dried voices, when we whisper together, are quiet and meaningless as wind in the dry grass, or rats' feet over broken glass in our dry cellar. Shape without form, shade without color, paralyzed force, gesture without motion. Those who have crossed with direct eyes to death's other kingdom remember us, if at all, not as lost, violent souls, but only as the hollow men, the stuffed men. We are live. It is Thursday, December 12th, 8 o'clock a.m., the year of our Lord 2024. The sun is shining, the birds are chirping. It's going to be a great fucking day, notwithstanding the hollow men of T.S. Eliot or of the FBI, notwithstanding the named appointment of Carrie Lake to run VOA, because you are watching Dog Shirt TV, which is a fucking revolution in morning television. And the revolutionary quality of Dog Shirt TV, I just want to put on the table right now, because about 20 minutes ago, I got a text from the estimable Jonathan Rauch, who said to me, hey, should I show up on Dog Shirt TV this morning? And I said, this morning and any morning. And he said something about, we have to talk about fucking. I'm not sure what that was about, but we're going to find out, because here he is. And I also got an email from Marty Lederman, because Marty had last night sent me a note criticizing my column about Chris Wray, and then tweeted criticism of David French's article about Chris Wray, which argued precisely the opposite of what I argued. And so I jokingly tweeted at Marty that he should show up on Dog Shirt Daily this morning and kind of explain how David French and I are both wrong, which he may or may not do. And that's the thing about Dog Shirt TV. I didn't know for sure that Jonathan was showing up until he showed up. And I don't know whether Mr. The estimable Marty Lederman will show up to explain why we're all wrong. And by the way, if he does, I have this other question for him, because since I learned of his comments on this subject, I learned about the appointment of Carrie Lake, and my impression is that the rules, as I tweeted, the rules for the appointment of a Carrie Lake in a position that is currently already occupied by a civil servant — you usually can't just fire a civil servant that easily — is actually a tricky business, and I can't think of anybody more likely to know those rules off the top of his head than Marty Lederman, longtime OLC guy, and the sort of guy who knows appointments clause issues off the top of his head. But so we'll see if Marty shows up. I don't know the answer to that. You're not allowed to have fun anymore. You're really fucking not allowed to have fun anymore. But you are allowed to have Jonathan Rauch, who wants to talk about fucking. So, Jonathan, what's on your mind?
Well, first of all, I would just like to point out
you're muted.
I'm not muted. Do I not have sound?
Wait, unless the problem is that something wrong with my audio.
Let me check the mic.
Wait, can people, so everybody can hear Jonathan except me? That's a bit of a problem because
People
I
can.
kind of need to be able to hear the guest in order to effectively run the show. Let me.
Should I go
So,
out and come back?
Jonathan, why don't you monologue about something while I try to figure out? But it can't be the subject that you want to talk to me about because. Oh, I see why I don't have Jonathan's audio. It's because my earpiece. Jonathan, can I hear you now?
Hello.
Hello. It's good to hear your voice.
Can
In
I
so many.
just say that the last 5 minutes have been the worst guest introduction I have ever received? Not only did you not plug in your headset, you spent 4 of the 5 minutes praising and introducing the guest who is not on the show.
Well, I will just point out that the incentive structure is you're already here. I already got you. All right, let's do a proper.
I would have something to say about that. And it would involve the letter F, followed by the 3 letters at the end of the word fire truck. But I have a bone to pick with you, and this is actually a serious bone. This is something I care about, that has bothered me in the larger world generally and bothered me about your show. And that is the liberal, the now profligate and increasingly so dropping of F-bombs. I hear this everywhere, the routine use of the word fucking and fucked up and so on as an ordinary modifier, as if it's just part of the regular English language. And I have a problem with that. And that's that for someone of my generation, this is still not cool. This is still a way of signaling a kind of vulgarity that's nasty. And even more important to me, this signals exclusionary behavior. Because
How does it signal exclusionary behavior?
Because there are millions and millions of Americans who, like me, are not comfortable with the use of that kind of vulgarity in common speech. So, for example, if you were to have most members of a church, for example, someone who is devout, a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, just for example, but many, many religious Americans would feel very uncomfortable with that. And this is a way of signaling to them, you're not welcome here, just as it would be a way of signaling to you that you're not welcome there if they insisted on referring to your son as your daughter, for example. I was very struck a number of years ago when a friend of mine who was raising at that point a teenager heard his teenager use the term Jesus Christ as a curse word. And he wheeled, I don't know what my lights are doing, so don't worry about it. He wheeled on the teenage son and he backed him right up against the wall. And he said, I never, ever want to hear you use the name of the Lord in vain again. That is deeply offensive to millions of people. And that's the right way to approach it. If something is offensive to millions of people, we shouldn't do it. It reduces the level of civil discourse. It excludes a lot of people. And finally, it's aesthetically and artistically cheap and lazy to use adjectives that mean nothing when you can use adjectives that mean something. So I am here representing to you a request. There are not many ways that I can try to reform the world. And we're going to talk about other ways that we can't reform the world if we get to Christopher Wray and Donald Trump. But one small thing I can do is urge my circle of friends to think a little bit harder about dropping F-bombs all the time. Now and then, sure, special emphasis or in conversations about pornography or actual fucking, okay, but that's different.
Alicia, what do you think of this idea? I thought about.
I mean, I wondered where it was going when I heard the opening.
What is your point of view fresh from Patagonia and Buenos Aires, um, and fresh from, I would like to point out, a long text exchange with me and the estimable Ev Gaumond about the word CUNT in different English-speaking countries' culture of offense, which was, but that's neither here nor there because that was not a public discussion. What do you think of Jonathan's point?
I can see where he's coming from on this. I can also see how, if you were trying to reach a broader audience, it would leave a lot of people out who find the use of those words distasteful. I can appreciate that. And I mean, okay, you hate when I do the Rube Act, but I came from nowhere in the rural countryside. My grandparents didn't swear. My parents still take issue with my use of swear words. They feel I'm far too sweary. My great grandfather would have done the same thing on the use of Jesus Christ. They didn't do anything on Sundays. There was no dancing and no fun. Solid Presbyterian stock. So I don't know. I can see this point of view. I can also see where there may be, if we were to swear less, it would have a lot bigger impact when we used it.
Well, that goes to Jonathan's other point, which I confess is the one that hits me in the gut, which is that it's, as a matter of prose style, cheap. I mean, all this stuff about inclusion I can take or leave, but when you start criticizing my prose, that hurts. Ev, what's your view of this?
I have to admit that I don't know what we're talking about. We're talking curse words. Yeah.
Jonathan has raised a concern about the prevalence of the word fuck and fucking on this show, and he has apparently earnestly, although with Jonathan there's always just this little question about whether he's parodying something, but it appears to be entirely in earnest, suggested that we're being too profligate, and that it has exclusionary characteristics and that it bothers him. Is that a fair summary, Jonathan?
I made arguments beyond just bothering me, but it certainly bothers.
I said that it's exclusionary.
Exclusionary, cheap, and not something I like to hang out with if I can avoid it.
I don't exactly understand how one would feel excluded, but I think it's because I am not necessarily well immersed in the Anglo culture, but I definitely see how it could be seen as a lack of imagination. There are plenty of words that can convey the same impact. So I'm all for variety in vocabulary, but I'm not offended by swear words at all.
All right. If members of the Collegium / Greek Chorus have views on this subject before I pronounce my ruling, they should, fucking come on the show and let us know. Sorry, Jonathan, I had to do it once.
I would just point out, I'm looking at the chat, and people are saying, personally, I can take or leave F-bombs. And someone else says, I'm not offended either. And of course, that's meant as people's individual views and input, which is great. But I would just want to point out that the whole point is not about whether you individually, people in the Greek chorus, are offended. It's whether you're offending other people in a way that is insensitive, thoughtless, and heedless of the fact that there are tens of millions of Americans in this country who just don't talk that way. And that you're not being offended is not the point.
All right. I think I am ready to pronounce judgment on this subject. Um, uh, uh, so here it goes. Here is a ruling from the chair of the I don't know, the I guess if we're going with Greek chorus, then I should be the I don't know what the right title is for in Greek, but clearly if we're going with collegium, I should be the consul. So here's a ruling from the consul. Jonathan's point is very well taken, and this is actually a reflection of how well taken it was, that I was very aware that I was not restricting my or anybody else's speech, but I was not particularly aware of profligacy or prevalence, which gives you an idea of how different the cultural norms are by different subpopulations. And so I am never going to tell people that they can't swear or curse on this show, because I don't want to regulate the way people speak as a general matter. I also don't tell people what they should that they should avoid language that will offend me. But to the extent that, Jonathan, your point is really about my own speech, which I think a good chunk of it is. Your point is very well taken, and I hereby abandon the word fuck and all of its adjectival, gerundal, and noun forms, verb forms as well, except to refer to sex, and except when I self-consciously choose to waive the ban for effect, like right fucking now. But beyond that, I banish the word from my public vocabulary on Dog Shirt TV. Your breathe. What are those deep
I wasn't
breaths,
sure
Alicia?
I could actually live up to the standard, so I was glad when you just put it on yourself.
No, it's just I'm not regulating people's speech on this show. It's just not happening.
I'm committed to trying.
If somebody wants to come on the show and say a whole lot of words that offend me, that will not prevent me from inviting the person back on the show if they otherwise have something useful to contribute. So if the question is, am I going to regulate anybody else's speech? The answer is no. If the answer is, am I going to try to be more mindful myself? I think your point has a lot of merit, and I don't want to be needlessly crass. So there you go.
Well, thank you. I feel that in one very, very small way, I've improved civility or helped to improve civility in the world. And I predict that you'll find that when your brain is forced to take that additional microsecond to think of the actual word you mean, so that instead of what Donald Trump today did was fucking stupid, you would have to say irreparably stupid or unprecedentedly stupid or some other word like that.
Or copulationally stupid.
Or that. That this will actually improve your thinking. So thank you for that.
Yeah. So this was not the direction that I thought the first 19 minutes of the show were going to take. And now let me introduce to the audience the estimable Jonathan Rauch, whose other complaint seems to have been that I didn't give him a proper introduction. Jonathan Rauch, as you all know, is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. He is a writer a senior editor, writer, deep thinker type at The Atlantic. I don't know what your title at The Atlantic is. And he is, or a contributing editor, maybe. I don't know. What is your title at The Atlantic?
A contributing writer, I think.
See, you use two. This is why, like, effing guy at, will sub in for almost any title.
So just so you know, I don't need the long introduction on my own behalf. What really hurt my ego was you instead introduced Marty Lederman, who didn't bother to show up.
Yet. Marty, where the F are you? By the way, I was thinking that this show was going to be about Chris Wray and appointments clause issues, not about F-bombs. And thinking that Marty's arrival was imminent, I was trying to connect the poem to the discussion and therefore the guest. But that's the thing about live TV. You never really know what you're going to be talking about or to whom. For example, I knew that neither Alicia nor Gaumond was going to show up today. And so here we are. It's 21 minutes past the hour. And I suppose we should talk a little bit about Chris Wray.
Yeah, could you explain what you said that was the opposite of what David French said?
So I was sort of teasing Marty with that, but David...
Marty isn't here, just in case you're wondering.
No, I'm aware, very aware. So David French argued, well, I argued, as did a number of other people, that what Director Wray did in preemptively announcing his resignation because Donald Trump wants to replace him with Kash Patel was cowardly and was a form of advance obedience of precisely the type that the Timothy Snyders of the world and Anne Applebaums of the world warn us against in this context, and that there is a very honorable way to do this, which is to, when you have a 10-year term, when you've been appointed by the president and when you've been confirmed by the Senate, which is to make the man fire you. And Trump has the authority to fire the FBI director, but he should have to exercise that authority. And I contrasted what Wray did with what Jim Comey did, admittedly in private, which was shortly after the 2016 election. Jim and I were sitting in his office, and I asked him whether he was going to resign, and he said, "No, I'm not going to resign. If asked for my resignation, I won't give it. And if Trump wants to get rid of me, he's going to have to fire me." And he did, and he did. And I thought that was a much better way to handle it. And Marty, who has magicked himself into the conversation, now that we're discussing polite things like the appointments clause, thought that was... I'll let him speak for himself, but he thought that was a silly distinction that doesn't carry much difference. And then David French wrote that, without reference to me or my argument, wrote that that Chris Wray's action was actually stealthily crafty because it has implications for limiting Trump's options under the Federal Vacancies Reform Act in terms of his acting replacement. And Marty, so instead of my argument, which was that it was cowardly, argued that it was clever. And Marty tweeted that it was that David's legal analysis was incorrect, and that it has no implications under the Federal Vacancies Reform Act, and therefore, by implication, whatever you credit with should not be considered clever. So, Marty, now that you're here, and I've given you this very warm introduction, I want to...
Instead of me, by the way.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw any of the part where Jonathan was complaining that I gave you an introduction, the guest that hadn't shown up, rather than him an introduction, the guest that had shown up. But then Jonathan took it in a very different direction and wanted to talk about, critique my use of inappropriate language. And so we had a little divergence for the first 20 minutes, but now we're back where we thought I thought we were going to be. And I want you to explain why both David French and I are wrong.
Well, Jonathan doesn't need any introduction, right?
That was my argument.
Okay. I'm happy to talk about language, if you want to do that.
Well, so let's get your views on that, since it was Jonathan came on and hijacked this conversation that was supposed to be about appointments clause issues to critique the profligacy of my use of a certain four-letter word that begins with F, and I listened to this and decided that there was some merit to his point and would curtail my use of the word. But would not impose that on any other person, either co-host or guest who shows up on the show. Do you have strong feelings about
You mean on this podcast you use profanity more frequently than off?
Apparently I use more profanity more frequently than I was aware of, enough to irritate
I've
Jonathan. I've
noticed that just even in your your Substack, you've sort of like become more no holds barred in terms of your language, which I took to be you are no longer trying to reach certain audiences. You're
well, that's kind of Jonathan's. That's kind of Jonathan's point, that it's exclusionary.
You're putting it all out there and being much more visceral in your approach to things than you once were, and that's a tactical judgment. I'm a bit surprised, but I understand why you, at this time and place, you might feel that way.
Fair enough.
None of this nearly as interesting as the appointments clause.
Yeah, let's talk about the appointments clause issues.
You want to start with that, because we can get rid of that in 2 seconds.
Yeah. So, well, start with it in whatever order you want. Why am I wrong? Why is David French wrong?
Well, let's start with the appointments.
Why am I wrong? I'm here.
Jonathan, I don't know what you've said, so I don't know whether you're wrong.
Just make up something that I'm wrong about.
Okay. It's not really the appointments clause, it's more the Vacancies Reform Act. So Jack Goldsmith and others have been writing that, while everyone has been obsessed with the question of recess appointments, in order to avoid Senate confirmation, everyone's ignoring the Vacancies Reform Act, which would allow Trump to put in place many of the people he wants to put into place without bothering with Senate confirmation. And that's true in a modest respect. He can put into place many loyalists in positions of importance who are not his nominees to be permanently part of that office, either by finding them within the federal government already who meet certain statutory criteria, or by choosing or by appointing first assistants, the deputy positions, to loyalists, and those people would then serve as the acting heads of the agencies or departments or sub-departments like the FBI during such time as his nominees are being considered by the Senate. That is very, very common. That happens in every administration. It happened in the Biden administration when I came into the office, and the Obama administration, right? This is how we staffed offices, which was by appointing first principal deputies who were not the nominees,
right?
Who served as the acting head of the office until someone was confirmed, at which point they became the second person in the office.
Don't
So
the
that may
deputies
very
need
well-
Senate confirmation?
What's that?
The deputies don't need Senate confirmation?
Correct. Into positions that do not themselves require Senate
So
confirmation.
you couldn't do it with the Attorney General because the Deputy Attorney General
Correct.
requires Senate confirmation. But Marty was at OLC. OLC has one Senate confirmed person. The FBI, the entire FBI agency of 30,000 people, has one Senate confirmed person.
Right.
One political appointee.
I don't know if it's one political appointee, but
It's one political appointee. The deputy.
No, the deputy is a political appointee.
No, the deputy is a career FBI agent.
By law? I don't think that's right.
I believe. Well, traditionally, there is only one political appointee in the FBI.
I'm not sure what you mean by political appointee. When Jim Baker was chosen as general counsel, he's a political appointee. He can be fired.
I guess that's right. No, he was. Wait a minute. He can be fired by the FBI director.
Or whoever appointed him.
Right. I don't believe he's not a presidential appointee, is what I mean.
Oh, okay. Yes, agree. There's one presidential appointee in the FBI. That's right. Okay, so I fully expect Trump will do this. He will appoint principal deputies across the administration, except, as Ben says, where the principal deputies themselves by statute have to be confirmed by the Senate. And in that way, we'll be able to accomplish much of the substantive things that he wants to accomplish, even if and when the Senate is dragging its feet on his nominees. Okay. But what he can't do is put into those positions the folks who he has nominated, right? So the Vacancies Reform Act prohibits, the Supreme Court case on this, prohibits appointing to the principal, to be acting, someone whose nomination is currently pending before the Senate. So if he nominates Kash Patel to be FBI director, Patel cannot be the acting director during that period. Now, most of the time, administrations want that anyway, because if you are the acting officer, you're doing things every day that might make it less
compromise
for the Senate to confirm you. So this is not usually something that people are too concerned about. But in any event, the law does not allow Patel to be both the acting director and the nominee at the same time.
Okay, so let me ask you about your, and this was done in a very brief email exchange, and so you haven't fleshed it out to me. Why are you tolerant of what Wray did yesterday? It seems to me like just giving advance consent, and I understand that it does not have practical differences. But if you stay and wait and make Trump fire you, you are saying, I am going to proceed under the regular order until he disrupts it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you resign in advance, it seems to me you're giving a gloss of normality to what Trump is doing here. And my question is, why somebody like you, who's a norms guy and who's serious about the norms and traditions about the Justice Department, why does that not bother you that he just basically said, I want to keep the FBI out of the fray, when what he really was doing is keeping himself out of the fray?
Yeah, so I didn't call your view silly, I don't think, which is how you characterized it in the opening. And I say this with some trepidation because friends of mine, such as yourself, Ruth Marcus, and others who I deeply respect, who have very good senses of this, think that there is a big difference between, in the words of Richard and Linda Thompson, did he jump or was he pushed, right? A resignation versus a removal. Let me preface it by reminding Ben and telling some of the viewers what they might not have known, which is I was on the other side of this debate during the Sally Yates during the first week of the first Trump administration against Jack.
So tell that story.
Against Jack Goldsmith. So Trump proposes the first Muslim ban and gets OLC to write that it is legally acceptable, his executive order prohibiting persons from 7 or 8 Muslim countries from entering the United States, just on OLC's standard form and legality review. But ultimately, that's subject to the approval of the Attorney General. And Sally Yates was the carryover Attorney General. She agreed. She had been Deputy Attorney General in the Obama administration, agreed to stay on as the acting Attorney General, which is very common when there's for the deputy to do that, or some high-ranking justice official. She was the acting Attorney General. It came to her attention, and to read between the lines, and it doesn't take much to read between the lines, she said, I am not going to allow my Department of Justice to defend this executive order. Without saying so, the obvious implication was because I know this was motivated by anti-Muslim animus and therefore is an Establishment Clause violation. Right. Even if it meets form and legality.
Right.
Because we can't second guess the president's motives. Give me a break. I know what he was up to here. I'm not going to defend this. Now, she did so fully aware that meant she would be removed the next day, which she was. Jack Goldsmith wrote, I think, on Lawfare.
Yes, on Lawfare, and I believe I sided with him.
And I may have written on Lawfare as well. I don't recall whether I responded at another venue. He's like, that was wrong of Yates to do that.
Yeah, I thought so too at the time.
She should have done what Elliot Richardson did, which was when she was asked to do something that she thought was legally and morally unacceptable, she should resign rather than force the president to remove her. And I said, well, no, actually, there's some value, political value, moral value, I don't know, in having her say, that's fine, I understand I'm going to be removed. He has every right to remove me. He ought to remove me. But in the meantime, I am the acting Attorney General, and I'm not going to defend this unconstitutional action.
Okay, so I'm curious why...
Now tables are turned.
Yeah, so now we've both... you've completely I was entirely sided with Jack on this at the time. I think I even wrote it, that Jack was... that I have no doubt that she was morally and ethically in the right, and that it was correct not to defend the order, but the proper way to handle that was resignation, not the way she did. I wasn't going to make a big deal about it because there wasn't that much distinction between the two in practice. Basically, I was arguing exactly what you're arguing now, and you were defending Sally Yates. So I can talk through my... So do you think you were wrong then?
Here to my mind,
I think I was wrong then.
Okay.
And that
here
you
to
were
my
right.
mind is the distinction. I'm going to suggest I was right in both cases. Although, again,
yeah,
I'm not at all committed to my position right now. You and Ruth may well be right. In that case, her public refusal to enforce an order that her OLC had just approved and that the president had just directed played a very important role. It was an announcement, a very rare historical case in which an attorney general is saying effectively to the public, our president, my boss, is acting unconstitutionally, and I will have no part of it.
Okay, so this is where...
And no one had said that yet. It wasn't clear.
So I completely agree with you, but I also think now you are petting the dog that didn't bark here, because the nature of what Chris Wray did really, causes... We're not going to have that moment. We're not going to have the moment. Instead, he got up and made a statement yesterday in front of the FBI workforce that was just sort of nonsense pablum about, doing our best work and doing the right things the right way every time, which is, of course, a dig at Pete Strzok and Jim Comey in coded FBI language, some of which you might be sympathetic to. And actually some of which I might be sympathetic to, although not the Pete Strzok part.
No, I've never criticized Pete. I don't know.
No, but when Chris Wray says that, what he means is, don't blame me for the Steele dossier. By the way, don't blame Pete for the Steele dossier either. But he's saying a lot of the MAGA criticisms of the FBI are right, and don't hold me accountable for any of them. And by the way, and by the way, I would never give a press statement like Jim Comey did. So a lot of the left criticisms are also right. We do things by the book now. And that's what instead of saying the president of the United States, notice, Jonathan, that I'm resisting the temptation to use any swear words here. Instead of saying there's a five-alarm fire right now, the president of the United States is preparing to install a malevolent, malignant, I don't know what the noun is for Kash Patel, attack dog who's got a hit list and who wants to indoctrinate small children in the conspiracy theories of MAGA. That's a five-alarm fire for this agency, and I will not participate in it by getting out of the way for him. He could have made that statement yesterday, and that would have been the equivalent of what you are praising Sally Yates for saying. Now, how to word that statement in a fashion that's befitting an FBI director, that's not my job.
Okay, but so I'm kind of agreeing with you, but I sort of saw his statement, milquetoasty as it was, as being pretty much that. I'm resigning because there's someone entering the office who wants to, for lack of a better word, weaponize this office in unconstitutional, inappropriate ways, and I won't be party to it. And now he did it in a very, very mild
bureaucratic
way, in the same way I suppose that Attorney General Garland, in his speeches, has not been, using the language that you've been using in your Substack on this post, right? It's like there hasn't been any fire-breathing sort of response to, our systems are breaking down and this is a crisis and we won't have any of it. He chose, I don't know Chris Wray personally, except, having met him a couple of times. He chose to act in a very deliberate way, the way an FBI director would, in part because he thinks that is appropriate for the department. And to act otherwise would be to sort of, would be to engage in the culture war.
Yeah, so I'm not saying
that's the right thing to do.
I'm not saying he should use the rhetoric that I've been using. I'm a rogue actor with a Substack and who writes a column. Yeah. I get to say things that the FBI director doesn't get to say. I do think he should have said something more like what Sally Yates said, which was, I will not participate in this. I will lead this organization as I have done unless and until I am removed.
I thought you were going to, I was with you until the very end there. Like, I'm resigning because this is what's coming and I won't be party to it.
No, I don't want him to resign. I want him to force.
So I wouldn't have minded a statement
which goes back to the point about Sally Yates did not resign. And I have come around to your view of that. Just lead your department until you are no longer in a position to do so.
So I think it would have been perfectly fine for Sally Yates to have resigned. But I also think that at the time, we all assumed, as was the norm since we were kids up until 2021 or 2017, that if you force the president to actually remove you, that comes at great political cost. Right? And that's the reason not to resign, is because that's the way the system works. Yes, even if you're a unitary executive of the John Roberts ilk, the president has broad authority to remove, but there is a fire alarm function that's played by
when you make him
do that. Now, maybe that's clearly not true anymore. He gets more juice out of firing someone politically now than having them resign. This is actually denying Trump something that he wants, ironically. And maybe there's something to that. But also, by the way, Elliot Richardson and Bill Ruckelshaus resigned. They didn't force Nixon to fire them. It was seen as the same thing. So I guess I don't see much of a difference in terms of did he jump or was he pushed? He was going to be out of office by the afternoon of January.
That's certainly true.
By the afternoon of January 20th, and I'm not at all convinced that if Trump had fired him on January 20th, that would make a whit's difference in the world other than possibly strengthening Trump. But I may be wrong about that.
Yeah,
so you and Ruth obviously think I'm wrong about that, and
I do, and I do think the manner in which Sally Yates went out mattered at the time. It mattered to courts consciously and subconsciously, and so look, it's a fascinating question, Jonathan. Before I turn and ask Marty about the VOA appointments clause issue that arose just, minutes ago or while I was asleep last night. Jonathan, Alicia, do you have a sense from listening to this debate of, do you have thoughts on this issue or questions or instincts about who is, about where the merits lie here?
Alicia, do you want to go first?
I mean, as an outsider, it's really hard to say. I think there is some merit into Trump not being able to say you're fired, which is like a crazy branding image of his. And so in some ways, maybe that works. And then the sad humanistic part of me says, maybe Ray didn't want to have to deal with the crap that's coming. I mean, he's human. Can't he step aside?
Well, that's, I do think lying down in front of the train is the duty of the person in charge at this point. And I think you and I get to make that judgment, but I don't think Chris Wray gets to make that judgment.
I had one question that is somewhat related, and you guys can hold this for after, but at the beginning of the conversation, there was discussion about people already inside the bureaucracy who may be Trump loyalists who could be appointed. And I'm kind of curious, how many of those do you think are there? Because it's kind of counterintuitive to the whole deep state conspiracy as well.
So nobody knows the answer to this question, particularly in the case of the FBI, which is an organization in which, unlike the National Cancer Institute, in which, we don't have, people really, really don't exercise their First Amendment rights outside of the context of, so I don't think, and also it emerges out of a police culture, which is a conservative culture. It's a disproportionately made up of, conservative white males who are in law enforcement for a living, right? On the other hand, it is an institution that Trump has savagely attacked over 8 years that has had to do things like execute search warrants against his house, right? And so I think it's a very complicated dynamic. And I'm sure there are some Trump loyalists. It is also, at least the headquarters culture was a place that, people displayed Comey's homies signs and mugs and, all kinds of things, pictures of him for, several years after he left. And people were comfortable doing that. And so there's I don't think anybody who proposes a simple answer to that question is I don't think nobody does public opinion surveys of the FBI. And so I think we just don't know. Marty, you've worked with them.
Two things. One is just an aside, which is I never heard this Comey's homies mugs thing, but it confirms, this is for another podcast, it confirms something on which Ben and I very much do disagree, which is whether Jim Comey was the right person for that job and whether he acted appropriately. But
different issue.
Totally
different issue.
Different issues. But Alicia, I mean, it only takes one. So all they have to do is find some U.S. attorney somewhere, or one assistant U.S. attorney who is they don't have to be a MAGA person. They just have to be, willing to pad their resume by being the acting FBI director for a few months and basically rubber stamping anything that the acting attorney general asks them to do. And so it only takes one person within the entire Department of Justice, or even a Senate confirmed person from outside it, who's been serving previously in order to fill that spot. So it doesn't matter whether there are 5 or 500. There only needs to be one.
Jonathan, your thoughts?
My thoughts are that Alicia's right. One of the factors here is the guy's probably got a family and he probably doesn't want to hire bodyguards. And we now live in the world we live in. And although I wish we didn't, I have decided that I'm not going to be in the habit of lecturing people who decide not to throw themselves in front of the train. I'm going to be in the business of trying to reduce the speed of the train if I can. That's going to be very difficult. I have tended to agree with Ben that it would be better from a symbolic point of view to say, make the bastard fire me, without giving a long speech.
Are we okay with the word bastard?
Yeah, in this context.
Okay. Just checking.
I think bastard is a technically almost correct word. There are two things that are happening that are wrong in this case. One is, of course, the nomination of Kash Patel, but the other is the termination of an FBI director without cause. I don't think that's happened before. I guess Comey kind of, but not like this. And I think it might have maybe made a statement about the norm of FBI directors serving out their term for him to say, I'm serving out my term because there's no cause to remove me. But that said, I go back to number one, which is, look, we live in a world now where if you don't want to hire bodyguards, you get out of the way. And we all on this call, we got to get used to that. It's a very different world. Statements of principle are all very well, but, what was Mitt Romney paying for his personal security? Something in the thousands of dollars every month. Can you explain the problem with Carrie Lake's appointment nomination?
Yeah, so I just want to throw this out there. I have not researched this question, but this is an issue about which I feel extremely strongly for reasons that are quite different from, the issues overlap with the issue of replacing Wray with a crazy person, but my interest in it is a different one. So my former Washington Post colleague, Mike Abramowitz, who Jonathan, I think as well from, he used to run Freedom House, and he's a wonderful journalist and a very serious pro-democracy guy. He has recently become the head of VOA, the Voice of America. Now, separately from that, I have worked very closely over the last 2 years with VOA journalists, particularly of the Ukrainian language service, but also of the Russian language service, related to my stuff at the Russian embassy. And I've learned a lot about VOA, which is almost completely invisible to Americans because it does not target American audiences. And almost all of its work is in languages other than English. It runs the biggest and best Ukrainian language newsroom in Washington, and probably the biggest and best Russian language newsroom in Washington. These are really important operations if you live in an emerging democracy or an authoritarian country. And it's a work that's completely invisible to Americans. So Trump announced last night that he was replacing, he didn't mention Mike, but that he was naming Carrie Lake to be the head of VOA, and that she would work with somebody who he would name in the future, who was going to run the parent company of VOA, which is an agency that he made war on in his first administration. My impression of this is that this is easier tweeted than done, that Abramowitz is a civil servant. So it implicates, the president can't just fire civil servants willy-nilly. so that it may get wrapped up in sort of regulatory questions around Schedule F or how the organization is organized. But I do think, you know, if replacing Chris Wray is a 5-alarm fire because these are the guys with guns who can, you know, arrest and kill Americans lawfully. Replacing the head of VOA with Carrie Lake, it's not a 5-alarm fire, but it's a 3-alarm fire. And it's a 3-alarm fire that nobody's going to notice or care about because it's you know, it's just foreign public diplomacy. It's just part of a war on foreign policy. And so my question, which I would direct to Marty in the first instance, do you know anything about what the rules are regarding, like, can you just put Carrie Lake in charge of VOA? You're muted.
I don't. I read a story while you're talking, I just read a story saying that by law, the appointment is made not by the president, but by a majority of the International Broadcasting Advisory Board. I haven't looked at the statute, so I don't know how those folks are chosen. And I don't even know if that's correct as a matter of law that they make the decision. But it could very well be. And given the language of Trump's announcement, it appears that someone else, maybe a board majority, maybe an individual, appoints the director of VOA. And therefore, Trump is going to have to change that person or that board in order to accomplish what he wants.
So it's more like a Louis DeJoy at the postal USPS kind of thing than a FBI 10-year term thing.
I just don't. I haven't seen the statute. I'll look for it while you guys are chatting.
Well, we're going to run out of time before you're going to figure it out. I will report back.
Does this end at 9?
It ends sharply at 9.
Oh, okay. So but we'll save for another day.
Yeah, no.
Of other matters.
I mean, we should actually have an ongoing appointments clause issues discussion here because so many of these things we think
big
of
business
as
in that's what the people are clamoring for.
Yeah, exactly. Look, so many things that we think of as presenting as policy issues in the first 6 months of an administration are actually appointments clause issues. All right, look, we're going to leave it there. Jonathan Rauch and Marty Lederman, you guys now have these magic links that mean you can just magic yourselves onto the screen at any time. We are live every day from 8 to 9, except next week when Marty and I will be in the Middle East.
Does every day mean 5 days a week or 7?
5 days a week, sorry. You guys should just consider yourself as having a standing invitation to show up. And as Jonathan did, change the subject of the show. And as Marty did, raise issues, address issues. The show often has a guest. I just scheduled an awesome guest, Jody Freeman, who is going to come on December 30th to talk about her new article about structural deregulation. This sounds super nerdy, and it is. It's really important. How do you deregulate? If you don't want to deregulate, you just strip agencies of their personnel and budget until they can't do anything. It's a super interesting article she's written, and she's going to come on and talk about it December 30th. Sometimes we have a scheduled guest, often we don't. And so consider yourselves anytime to be welcome unscheduled guests. Jonathan, I have not said the word fuck once since your school marmish peremptory lecture, and I promise I will restrain my coarse instincts further. You're all great Americans, except you, Alicia, great Canadian, and great.
Canada's part of America, as Alicia would probably tell
Yeah,
you.
Trump has announced that we're absorbing you, so he's given up on Greenland.
Manifest destiny brought back by Trump. No thanks.
I'm just saying he's not talking about Greenland anymore, but he does seem to have told your prime minister that we're going to absorb you.
It's 9. We'll talk tariffs another time and how we'll cut off the electricity from Ontario down to some states. Please,
not to mention from Quebec.
Fun fact: I grew up in the United States, 10 miles north of Ontario.
I'm probably 10 miles north of the US right now, but so is most of Canada.
All right. We're going to leave it there. Thanks, guys. Talk to you soon.